Not so long ago, in a world full of strife, a man born a wolf, living a dual life. With magic in his veins, he walked the school hall, learning the arts, answering the call. But fear was a cloak he had to wear tight, hiding his truth, keeping darkness from light. Those who were scared turned away in despair, yet he bore the burden, he chose to take care. Now the times have changed, the monster's no longer scared. He's retired from magic, but his stories still flare, with tales of heroes, of legends so grand, selling dreams of the past across this vast land. In the shadows he lingered, where darkness would creep, protecting those kindly, never losing sleep. A guardian of secrets, a keeper of lore, he wandered through echoes, hearts wanting much more. No longer the wolf, but a sage with a pen, turning back the pages, reliving back then. His stories weave magic in the minds of the young, of battles and triumphs, where songs will be sung. Now the times have changed, the monster's no longer scared. He's retired from magic, but his stories still flare, with tales of heroes, of legends so grand, selling dreams of the past across this vast land. Listen closely, hear the whispers in the breeze, of knights and of dragons beneath the ancient trees. The wolf in his wisdom has so much to share, from magic to courage, loving hearts laid bare. So gather round, children, let the stories unfold, of a man who had magic, but chose to be bold. Through tales of old, his spirit survives, a wolf in disguise, in every heart he thrives. Now the times have changed, the monster's no longer scared. He's retired from magic, but his stories still flare, with tales of heroes, of legends so grand, selling dreams of the past across this vast land. So remember this lesson as you look to the skies, even hidden beneath, we see with our hearts, not our eyes. For every wolf's journey, there's magic in the tales of kindness and courage, where love prevails. Not so long ago, in a world full of strife, a man born a wolf, living a dual life. With magic in his veins, he walked the school hall, learning the arts, answering the call. But fear was a cloak he had to wear tight, hiding his truth, keeping...
Okay, I started the song a little early this time. But, welcome in. Now, still got a few seconds, but anyway, welcome in anyway. Okay, now it says you're back. I have no idea who the trivia is about at all. I've never heard of the band called Madness, so... But anyway, welcome in. It is Thursday, I think. I hope. Pretty sure yesterday was Wednesday. Yeah. I lose track of days pretty easily, and I almost fell asleep waiting for the stream. But here we are. Welcome in. We are going to be reading more of The Mummy. I think we're... Hold on, look at the book real quick. Yeah, we're not even halfway through it yet. But it is a 33 chapter book. I don't know which chapter we're on. Which chapter we're coming up on? On 14. Okay, so we're more than a third of the way through. Can't really think much introduction to do. I don't know if I need to wait for people to show up or not. But we've got a lot of reading to take care of. If you haven't been paying attention to my Twitter posts or Blue Sky, I recorded 5 more chapters of Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz today, so a little tired. Been doing more voices, so if I have trouble speaking in this one... Oh, hold on, let me open my bottle. I've got a bottle of tea that I'm using to hydrate. Also 2 bottles of water in case I need them, but if we do 2 or 3 chapters tonight, that'll be good. I would like to go for 3. Just so we can get more of the book done, and if we get 3 chapters done, we'll be halfway through the book. Well, a little over halfway through the book. Since it's a 33 chapter book, we'll be into chapter 17. Well, we'll be on chapter 17. Yeah, we'll be there. If I do 4 chapters, we'll pass the halfway mark. Chapter-wise, anyway. Anyway, I'm going to go and switch over. Before I just get rambling and go all over the place. And by all means, feel free to lurk. I do have a 1-point lurker redeem. That's just lurker love. That lets me know you're here. Let's Twitter know. Oh, not Twitter. Let's Twitch know you're here. So, well, people know I exist, I guess. I do apologize. I'm going to start leaving the 720 versions that for some reason Twitch streams me at as my files here on Twitter. Why do I keep saying Twitter? On Twitch. I may start editing the recorded videos that usually shoot in 1080 and put those on the YouTube channel. I haven't quite decided if I want to put in that much extra work to edit 2 different versions. I may. I don't know. Either that or I need to figure out how to readjust OBS to get it to broadcast as 1080 as well. I lowered it to the 720 just so it would have less skips. But my canvas is 1960 by 1080. But for some reason, it broadcasts on Twitch as a 720, which I've got a fast enough internet connection, I shouldn't have to do that. But anyway, enough of my needless rambling around. Let's get into the book, shall we? Chapter 14. Oh, what am I hearing? You're bad. I gotta figure this out. Okay. I'm back. You missed me? If so, what did you throw at me? Anyway. I just wanted to do a shout out for all those wonderful people who are getting to go to TwitchCon this weekend. I'm stuck here. Just kidding. No, I'm broke. I can't afford to travel that much. I, you know, books say what's being what they are. Yeah, I won't get into that. But anyway, let's get into the book, shall we? Chapter 14. When the Reverend Father took refuge in his chamber after this fearful and memorable interview, he felt that strange, mysterious sensation of something dreadful hanging over him, though he scarcely knew what, which so often weighs upon the mind when any great and unexpected change has taken place in our destiny. He threw himself upon a sofa and endeavored in vain to analyze his feelings. He was not superstitious, but there was something about the mummy that inspired him with awe in spite of himself, and he felt he was no longer his own master, for a supernatural power seemed to mingle with his designs and control his actions. He endeavored in vain to recur the plans he had that morning arranged for gaining over partisans to the side of Rosabella. He could not govern his ideas. He could no longer direct them as he wished. One sole thought occupied his mind. One sole image floated before his senses. He held his head in his hands, and he pressed them firmly against his ears, and closed his eyes as though by shutting out external objects his mind could recover its tone. It was all in vain. The gaunt figure of the mummy still seemed to stalk before his eyes, and his fiendish laugh still ring in his ears. Father Morris rose from his couch and threw open his window, the cool evening breeze reviving him and restoring his faculties. He now began to reason with himself. "It is very strange," he said, "but unaccountable though it may seem, the destinies of this fearful being are evidently interwoven with mine. His appearance here at this eventful moment, and his forcing himself upon my confidence with a secret power superior to my own, prevented the possibility of my refusing him, cannot surely be accidental. No, no, he is permitted to revisit the earth for some positive and definite purpose, perchance to counteract my plans, perchance to aid them. There is no vanity in the thought, for upon my destiny at this moment hangs that of a mighty empire, and I feel that I am but a blind instrument in the hands of fate, condemned to work, mole-like, in the dark, uncertain whether might be drawing destruction upon my head at this very moment, when I fancy I am attaining the pinnacle of my happiness and glory. However, I will not be wanting to myself. This strange agent may be sent to aid me, and it shall not be my fault if I do not avail myself of its assistance. In this present garb he treats disgust and terror, but clothed as a human being, his superhuman eloquence and his strange, fearful interest, excited by his looks and manner, might render him a powerful assistant. It shall be my present business, then, to endeavor to make him serviceable to my views, and to do this I must persuade him to adopt the dress and manners of the country." Pleased with the resolutions he had taken, and quite forgetting the lateness of the hour, Father Morris ascended hastily to the usual sitting-room of Mrs. Montague, but what was his horror on encountering it to find, instead of the usual cheerful party he expected, only the dreaded mummy. Cheops lay stretched upon the couch he had before occupied, his eyes fixed upon the brilliant constellation of Orion, and his lips murmuring an address to the deity he fancied it to represent. "Yes, blessed Horus," cried Cheops, as Father Morris entered the room, "thou wilt hear my prayer, for thou hast also been a stranger in a foreign land, forced even in thy mother's arms to fly, pursued by all the fury of fell Typhon's rage. Thou knowest how I pity the unhappy, and thou too, bright Isis," continued he, addressing the moon. "Thou also hast known sorrow, when thy streaming tears occasioned the first overflowing of the Nile, and grief for the loss of Osiris rent thy bosom with despair. Then becamest thou well fitted to the patroness of the wretched. O Arsinoe, could I but recall that fateful moment when I saw thee last." "Despair is sinful," said Father Morris, who now stood beside him. Repentance may obtain forgiveness, even of the most heinous crimes. Cheops started upon his feet at the sound of the father's voice, and burst into one of his fearful laughs. "And who art thou?" he cried. "Who presumest to preach repentance to me? Oh, I know thee now. Thou art the priest whose confidence I have become. But though I will aid thee, think not I will be thy slave. No, rather art thou mine, for thou art in my power." Father Morris felt his blood curdle in his veins at this address, and though he strove to speak, his tongue clove to the roof of his mouth and would not articulate a word. Cheops saw his embarrassment and continued in a milder tone. "Fear nothing. We may be useful to each other. I would fain quit these garments of the tomb, and since I seem destined to remain some time amongst your fellow men, I will endeavor to assume their manners. You seem to have intelligence among them. You seem to have influence among them. Try, then, to pacify their fears and teach them to regard me as a fellow being." At this moment, the solemn clang of a deep-toned bell fell heavily upon their ears. Cheops started at the sound, and springing up from the couch on which he had reclined, bent forward eagerly to listen to it slowly peal into the deep silence of the night. It was a great bell at the ancient cathedral of St. Paul, which tolled to announce that on the following day the body of the deceased queen would lie in state. "What is it?" cried Cheops. "Whence comes that fearful knell, awful as a sound which is doomed to sink into the souls of the initiate of the Isian mysteries? Again it tolls. Speak! Whence comes it? What does it foretell? Is it the signal of another change of existence, strange, awful, and mysterious as that I have already experienced? Let it come. I am prepared. The gods cannot inflict tortures more horrid than those I already suffer. Cannot, have I said? Dead Osiris, forgive the impetuous thought. Methinks even now that I see thy dark blue countenance frowning in awful majesty at my unguarded rashness. Forgive me, mighty spirit. No longer will I repine at thy decrees, but teach my proud rebellious heart submission. Alas, alas, had I done before Center. But it is too late now, and happiness is lost to me forever." Sighing, he hid his face in his hands as he spoke, and all again was silent, save for the deep-toned bell, which still fell heavily in intervals upon the ear. Slowly the hours rolled on, yet still Father Morris sat gazing on the mummy, till the first bright tints of morning broke through the dark gray sky, and a half-subdued bustle of the streets, as of people hurrying to and fro, announced the preparation were making to hang them with black. A confused murmur, the busy voices hushed in whispers, and the still continued tolling of the muffled bell harmonized with the fearful form of the mummy's visant, which, now seen dimly by the uncertain shades of the breaking twilight, seemed to acquire fresh horrors from the obscure and wavering gleams thrown upon it. It was at this moment, when objects were gradually becoming more distinct in every instant, that Lord Edmund rushed into the room. "Father Morris," he cried, "you must aid me, or all is lost." And as he spoke, he started back aghast, for the terrific form of the mummy struck upon his sight. He had seen him, it was true, on his first descent, but the events that had since occurred, involving as they did the dearest interests of his soul, had almost driven the circumstance from his memory. Now, however, aided by the elusive light, the spectre appeared before him in all its frightful reality, and even the firm mind of Edmund shrunk back aghast from the appalling sight. "Why do you shrink?" said Cheops, his deep, hollow voice thrilling through the souls of his auditors. "Why does my form appear to create such terror? Is it because a tomb has been my dwelling? Oh, degenerate race! Know that the sons of Mizraim, wise and bold, learned they were, held that communication with the dead was needful to the living. They loved to gaze upon the empty caskets, deprived of all that gave it value, what taught the meaningness of the body, and who could dwell upon the withering, worthless clay, and not acknowledge to a soul how poor were its highest pleasures when compared to the sublime aspirations of the spirit. Why then tremble? Virtue need no fear spectres. Vice might shudder at itself. If thine own conscience do not upbraid thee, what hast thou to fear? Nothing, said Lord Edmund firmly. Spectre or demon, whatever you may be, I fear you not. 'Twas but the infirmity of human nature. It is past, and I am again myself, and strong in the consciousness of the integrity of my own mind. It is not in the power of hell itself to frighten me from my purpose. The integrity of thine own mind, cried Cheops with one of his horrid laughs. Poor weak offspring of clay! I confide in thy boasted strength, rely upon thy vaunted firmness, but when the hour of trial of temptation shall arrive, tremble. Lord Edmund shuddered in spite of himself, and his blood bled colder in his veins. Who art thou? He cried indignantly. Strange, terrible being that thou art, and why art thou permitted to revisit earth to taunt me into madness? I was once as thou art, returned Cheops, young, ardent, and impetuous. I thought the world was made for happiness, and that men were born to be my slaves. Glory was my idol, and fame only meed I can vent. Deeply did I think of her intoxicating cup, and my renown spread to the remotest corners of the earth, and my power became as boundless as my ambition. To immortalize my name, I caused the erection of an enormous pyramid, and my grandeur seemed beyond the reach of destiny to destroy. But I trusted in my own strength, and I fell. Tremble then, weak man, nor dare to boast how thou wilt act upon the moments of temptation shall arrive. The deep, thrilling voice of the mummy fell upon Lord Edmund's ear as a warning from the tomb. He, too, was relying on his own strength, and should he fall too? Heaven forbid. No, thought he, and some causes I may fear, but now, when the welfare of her I love is at stake, I cannot fail. The mummy smiled as he read the thoughts that passed over Lord Edmund's expressive countenance. Thus I thought too, murmured he, and as I was, so will he be deceived. Human nature is still the same, even in the remotest corner of the globe. Fool that I was then to attempt to reverse her decrees. Forgive me, mighty Isis. The rest was lost in inarticulate murmurs as the mummy's head sank upon his heart. Oh, God, cried Edmund to Father Morris, whence comes this fearful spectre? What does it import? I know not, said Father Morris in a hoarse, unnatural whisper, his eyes still strained upon the mummy. Edmund started, for the unusual abstraction of Father Morris added fresh horror to the scene. His senses seemed bewildered. He scarcely knew where he was, or what was passing around him. He rubbed his eyes and tried to wake from what appeared a frightful dream, but in vain. The vision was still there in all its horrible distinctness, and Edmund felt a terrific creeping steal along his nerves as the hollow spectral voice of the mummy again fell upon his ears. Alas, where am I? Continued he. Can that river be a ramification of my beloved Nile, or am I indeed torn from all I prize and love, to be cast upon this secluded spot where all seems strange and insignificant? O deity of the foaming waters, holy Sirius, hear me! Calm my troubled spirit and grant some gracious manifestation of thy divinity to chase my growing doubts. But I deceive myself. This is not the Nile. No papyrine boats glide over its polished surface. No acanthus groves nor forests of lofty palm border its banks. No, no, the immortal palm, fit emblem of the soul, grows only in those favored realms where, spurning it to oppression, it resists the feeble efforts of man to bend it to the earth, and springs upward with only added vigor from the feeble attempts made to subdue it. The mummy ceased, and a solemn silence prevailed. while his passion, fierce as a whirlwind's fury, flitted across his face, chilling the beholder's heart with horror at the fearful being whose bosom could conceive them. Father Morris was not naturally timid. He even possessed an uncommon strength both of nerves and mind. Yet an unwonted shuddering ran through his frame as he gazed upon Cheops, and traced the workings of the demonic mind as they were successfully imprinted on his features. Involuntarily he turned away in disgust. "For God's sake, let us go!" cried he, gasping for breath, for a strange feeling that he could not define seemed to impede his respiration. Yes, let us go," stammered forth Edmund, still, however, keeping his eyes fixed upon the awful object of his fear, as he slowly moved towards the door. "Stay!" cried Cheops in a voice of thunder. Involuntarily they obeyed. "How feeble is this race of men," resumed the mummy. "How different from the sons of ancient Miserium, and of the Microbian Ethiopians, or even the phallic foes, degenerate in form as well as spirit. Their souls no longer seem emanations from the divinity, though perhaps the immortal spark becomes degraded and abased from its long continuance in clay, and is sunk forever from its pristine greatness. Stay, then," continued he. "Why should you flee me? I mean you no harm. I swear by the sacred tomb of Osiris the Flay, I will not hurt you. Drive me then from amongst you, and I may aid your projects. At least it is your duty to receive me as the destined instrument of fate, since Osiris decrees that my soul shall quit its transmigration to the form of animals to reanimate this worthless body. Take me then to your councils, confide in me power, and I swear by the holy dust of Isis that you shall not repent." "Avaunt, demon!" cried Lord Edmund, and bursting from the room, he rushed out of the house. What further passed between the priest and his awful visitor was known only to themselves, for when the family descended to breakfast, the mummy was gone, and Father Morris appeared absorbed in his usual studies, without taking the slightest notice of the terrific occurrences of the night. The death of the queen now being generally known, her remains, laid in state, were exposed to the lamentations of her subjects, and the family of Mrs. Montague were amongst the earliest visitors of the morning spectacle. In an immense hall, hung with black, was a kind of a bier, covered with black cloth, supporting the body of the deceased queen, over which was thrown a velvet pall, so disposed, however, as to display the beautiful features of the deceased, which, though now fixed in death, still remained their native expression of majestic dignity. Immense tapers of enormous thickness lighted the somber halls, hung with black cloth, while the cloister boys walked up and down chanting hymns in honor of the deceased, and flinging incense in the air from silver vessels suspended by silver chains, which they carried in their hands, thus shedding fragrance round and chasing the fearful odor of mortality even from the very chamber of death. Priests wrapped in funeral garments also slowly paraded the room, muttering prayers and joining occasionally their full, deep-toned voices with the shriller chant of the boys. The space where the public were admitted was railed off from the lower end of the hall, but near the body knelt a beautiful female arrayed in black velvet, and her fair face and arms shaded by a veil of black crape. "Oh, Osiris!" cried a figure wrapped in a long dark cloak, grasping the arm of Father Morris. "Who is that lovely creature there, bending over the last awful relics of mortality? Methinks she looks beauteous as a phoenix rising from a funeral pyre, and triumphing in glory over the impotent malice of the grave." "Hush, for heaven's sake," whispered a deep, full voice of Father Morris. "It's Elvira, the rival of Rosabella, whom you have sworn to support." "Typhon himself could not injure her," said Chops, for it was he, and he stood with his eyes fixed upon her, apparently lost in meditation. "For mercy's sake, let us go on," whispered the priest. "You will excite attention. We shall be discovered. Besides," continued he in a lower tone, Did you find a crown so delightful that you think you would injure her by depriving her of one? No, by the holy limbs of Osiris, said Cheops, and obeying the influence of the friar's arm, he moved onwards. Why was not Rosabella with Elvira in the hall? Asked Ambrose. I thought it was commanded by law that all the princesses of the royal blood should exhibit themselves publicly as mourners by the corpse of the deceased queen. Rosabella is ill, replied the Duke. Grief for the loss of her cousin has produced an excess of fever, and she is unable to quit her bed. Indeed, returned Sir Ambrose incredulously. It is very strange. I own I did not give Rosabella credit for so much sensibility. Notwithstanding the incredulity of Sir Ambrose, however, Rosabella was dangerously ill, though her illness did not proceed exactly from the cause she chose to assign it. The terror she had felt from the sudden appearance of a mummy, whom she thought a supernatural being, at the very moment she believed the death of her cousin was darkly hinted at by the monk, operated upon an overexcited imagination and had produced a fever, and for some days Rosabella was in considerable danger. The secret exertions of Father Morris, however, in her behalf, prevented Rosabella's cause from being injured by her illness, and by the time she was able to leave her bed, Lord Gustavus de Montfort, Lord Maysworth, and Dr. Hardman, with the Lords Noodle and Doodle, had declared themselves her adherents, bringing with them all the numerous hosts who, finding it too much trouble to judge for themselves, are always ready to follow in the train of a great man. The day when this important declaration was made was that on which all the nobility of the realm assembled in that splendid monument of antiquity, Westminster Hall, to choose the Council of States to govern the kingdom during the interim. This vulnerable pile, which had seen so many generations successfully rise and pass away, now cleared of the encumbrances with which the bad taste of the Middle Ages had loaded it, shone in all its original magnificence. It opened wide its ponderous portals to receive the whole nobility of England upon this important occasion. It was a glorious and almost an awful sight to see so many great and illustrious characters, some of whose names were celebrated even to the remotest corners of the globe, collected together in that magnificent hall. Few, however, thought of the grandeur of the spectacle, the deep interest excited by the occasion that assembled them, absorbing all minor feelings. The business of the day was soon entered upon, and 12 noble individuals chosen to direct the affairs of state, till another queen should be elected. The Duke of Cornwall, Lord Edmund Montague, Lord Gustavus de Montfort, Lord Maysworth, and the Lords Noodle and Doodle were amongst the number chosen, and as soon as the election was completed, the council retired together to an apartment appropriated for their use to consult upon the measures to be taken to secure a due election of their future queen. Then it was that the anxious father Elvira was paralyzed to hear the noble lords above mentioned declare themselves partisans of her rival, and to see others who had till then remained neutral seem inclined to range themselves upon either side. In vain did Edmund exert his powerful eloquence. The weight and influence of his adverse lords far outweighed his arguments in the breasts of the auditions, and the poor old Duke returned home depressed and almost heartbroken from the conviction he received that the feeling of the majority of the council was decidedly against his child. The moment the Duke reached his own palace, he repaired to the apartment of Rosabella, and found her apparently in a state of convalescence, reclining upon the sofa, supported by her confident Marianne, with Father Morris sitting at her feet. The Holy Father was evidently confused at the unexpected arrival of the Duke, and he rose hastily in great disorder to endeavor to account for his appearance there. The Duke, however, was much too enraged to listen to him, or indeed to notice the suspicious circumstance of his secretly visiting the princess. His passion was solely directed at Rosabella, and not even her present feeble and emaciated appearance was sufficient to disarm his anger. "Wretch!" he declared, "vile, ungrateful wretch that thou art, thou hast destroyed me, that will bring the grey hairs of thy benefactor with sorrow to the grave, and so treacherous, too! O Rosabella! How could you plot against me whilst you were enjoying the shelter of my roof? Against me, did I say? Alas, it would only be against me, but no, with fiend-like barbarity you have conspired to destroy my child. The Duke had there unwittingly struck a chord that thrilled to the inmost souls of his auditors. He did not heed their confusion, however, and went on. Oh, Rosabella, if I could have guessed when thou wert brought to me a little smiling infant, and I took thee under my protection to foster thee as my own child, that thou wast prove a serpent to sting my heart to the core. But I was told it would be so. Sir Ambrose warned me to beware. Your brother, said he, has proved a villain, and the violence of his passions has led him to commit unheard-of crimes. It may not be the same furies grow in the bosom of a smiling infant. Do not desert her, but do not educate the offspring of guilt in the bosom of your own family. Did Sir Ambrose say anything else? Exclaimed Father Morris, grinding his teeth together and scarcely able to articulate from the strength of the emotion that convulsed his frame. The Duke, however, did not hear his question, and passionately continued. He advised me well, but I was deaf to his counsel. Fate hurried me on to my own destruction, and I nourished with the tenderest care a wretch whom I have this day discovered plotting as traitorous to deprive my daughter of her birthright. What do you mean, my lord? Said Rosabella. I do not understand you. Yes, yes, replied the Duke. Ask what I mean. You may well assume that face of smiling innocence, too. Too often it served your purpose. Fool, idiot that I have been, to have been so easily deceived. But your arts will be in vain now. Lord Gustavus de Montfort could not have openly declared himself your friend, as he did today, if the most insidious arts had not been practised to win him. And has he done so? Asked Rosabella, with her eyes sparkling with joy. Has he done so? Repeated the Duke bitterly. No doubt you know it but too well. Also that the proposing Lord Maysworth and the enlisted Lord Noodle and the intelligent Lord Doodle have enlisted their empty heads and long purses to your side. Hey, Guilty. Welcome in. I'm going to play a Duke during a tirade. And thank you for the hydrate. Have they? Cried Rosabella, transport brightening every feature. Oh, Rosabella! Exclaimed the Duke, passion giving way to agony, and the torrents of tears streaming down his aged face. That look of affected astonishment is intolerable. You must have known all this. I'm a poor, weak old man. There needed not be such plotting to deceive me. It breaks my heart to find you guilty of hypocrisy. Rosabella was affected by her uncle's tears. All her former kindness rushed upon her mind, and later resuming her powerful influence, she forgot all her ambitious projects, her hopes, her fears, her intrigues. She thought only of the feeble, miserable old man before her, and attempting to throw her arms round his neck, she sought to mingle her tears with his, and clinging to his feet, implored his forgiveness. The Duke, however, could not read her heart, and blinded by passion, saw this action as an aggravated insult. Violently he spurned her from doing, and commanding her to leave his house immediately, and by so doing, extinguished forever every gentler feeling in his niece's breast. Rosabella's haughty spirit did not wait for a second repulse. Her tears were instantly dried, and with her eyes flashing fire and cheeks glowing with indignation, she rushed out of the room without deigning to reply. The Duke's rage, if possible, exceeded her own, and these near relations, united as they were by the tenderest ties, parted in mutual hatred, sincerely hoping on both sides that they might never meet again. Father Morris and Marianne followed Rosabella, and they found, as they expected, that the violent overexcitement of the moment had given way to hysterics. These tremendous convulsive agonies soon exhausted her feeble frame, and she lay upon the sofa in a state of torpid languor, nearly approaching to insensibility, whilst her friends consulted upon what course they should pursue. During this pause of uncertainty and painful deliberation, for as Rosabella was entirely dependent upon her uncle, the case seemed hopeless, a letter arrived from Lord Gustavus de Montfort, offering to loan of his palace and his purse to the princess. That prudent and calculating nobleman was fully aware of the situation in which Rosabella would be thrown in by his declaration in her favor, and of the advantage that would accrue to himself in after times, if she should obtain the crown, from his having at such a moment conferred an important service upon his future sovereign. Father Morris did not hesitate to open the letter and read it. Rosabella was not in a state to be consulted. Indeed, the case was one that did not admit of hesitation, and a conveyance having been procured, the princess was removed from the house of Lord Gustavus before she had recovered full use of her faculties. Oh. Angry reading. Man. I don't want to turn on my fan, but I don't want to hear the freaking fan noise on the microphone. About burning up. I would ask how bad the fan sounds, but ow. I don't know. Can the fan be heard? Yeah. I'm taking a drink. The Duke and Chop signs. Yeah. Okay. Chapter 15. The morning appointed for the election of the Council of State was passed by Elvira in the most intense anxiety. For herself, she had no wish to be a queen, nay, perhaps she trembled at the thought. But when she saw how earnestly it was desired by her father, and thought of the bitterness of his disappointment she should be rejected, her eyes filled with tears, and she felt ready to make any sacrifice to promote his happiness. Thus, trembling with agitation, yet fearing like every change, the fair Elvira sate, leaning her head upon her own hand, whilst Sir Ambrose, whose rank did not entitle him a vote, Dr. Coleman, and Henry Seymour endeavoured to console her. "My dear young lady," said the good doctor, indeed, I think you distress yourself quite unnecessarily. With such supporters as your father and Lord Edmund, I do not think you can fail from success." "You quite mistake me, doctor, I assure you," returned the princess. "I think not of the crown, yet it is not possible to express what I have suffered during the last few hours. Ere my father went to the council this morning, his agitation was so excessive that I feared it would destroy him, and my impatience for his return has become almost agony." "Let me entreat your highness to be composed," said Henry Seymour. "You torment yourself with your vain terrors. I cannot suffer myself to imagine for a moment that the Duke can be otherwise unsuccessful." "My dear child," observed Sir Ambrose, "exert your own good sense. Nothing can be more foolish than to let imaginary horrors usurp your influence of your senses. Thus you suffer doubly, and often the pains of anticipation exceed those of reality. But see, here comes Father Murphy and my little lively niece Clara. Well, father, what news? Will the princess be queen?" "Ah, and there can be no manner of doubt of it," returned Father Murphy. Elvira turned pale. "God grant his mercy, you may be mistaken," she said. "Oh dear!" cried Clara involuntarily. "Why do you exclaim, my fair lady?" exclaimed the doctor, smiling. "I am so surprised, so astonished," said the blushing girl. "At what?" resumed the doctor inquisitively. That, went Tara timidly, "the princess should not like to be a queen." "Alas, said Elvira, smiling languidly. "You are too young, Clara, to know the awful responsibility such a situation would impose. The Queen of England must devote herself to her people. Once elected, she is cut off forever from all the happiness of domestic life. She must form no ties, she must indulge in no attachments. She can never feel the happiness of devoting herself entirely to promote the welfare of one adored object. she could never know the transports of a mother. And sighing deeply, Elvira cast her eyes upon the ground, whilst those of Henry Seymour were fixed earnestly upon her. Yet all this, said Sir Ambrose, is rather imaginary than real. The subject of a good queen ought to be her children, and the glory of the contributing to the happiness of thousands and ruling nations by nod may well compensate for the humbler comforts of the domestic fireside. I do not agree with you, said Dr. Coleman. I think the situation of a queen is both of trouble and responsibility. We now know how difficult it is to give satisfaction even to the most ordinary occurrences of life, and how much must that difficulty be increased by such an exalted station. Besides, it seems cruel to condemn a young and beautiful woman to the miseries of celibacy. Women naturally seem to want support. She is to man what the clinging ivy is to a majestic oak, its loveliest ornament. But take away the standard tree, and she falls forlorn and unsupported in the dust. Do you not think so, Mr. Seymour? Wow, that's sexist. The youth started at his appeal, for his thoughts had indeed wandered far from the scene before him. Yes, said he, after a short pause. Sir Ambrose laughed heartily. Upon my word, said he, I congratulate you, Dr. Coleman, upon your happiness in having such attentive auditors. The princess looks as if she had not heard a single word that you have said, while Mr. Seymour, when you appeal to him for his opinion, only starts and says yes. You are quite right, Sir Ambrose, returned Dr. Coleman, smiling good-humouredly, and I begin to discover that reasons are quite useless when the feelings are interested. Ugh, said Father Murphy, and my opinion is that we all have reason to be interested, for I should not be surprised at all if a king of Ireland was to take advantage of our troubles and to make a descent upon us. There is no time so fitting for throwing everything into confusion as when nobody knows what he is doing. There may be much justice in your remark, Holy Father, said Henry Seymour, smiling, but for my own part, I do not apprehend the King of Ireland as such a bloody-minded intentions. The report speaks highly of his son, observed Elvira. Not more highly than he deserves, cried Dr. Coleman enthusiastically. The youthful Roderick is brave, noble, and generous, possessing every quality to fit him for a hero, and is quite incapable of anything upon the meanness. Is he handsome? asked Clara, the infant and the naivete, looking up earnestly at the doctor as she spoke. As Achilles of the ancients, replied the doctor. Dear me, how I should like to see him, said the little beauty with utmost simplicity. Should not you, Mr. Seymour? I cannot say I have my curiosity, returned Henry Seymour, having infinitely difficulty to help laughing. Dear me, how very odd, said Clara, looking at him earnestly. I do believe the doctor is only quizzing us, and that he's very ugly and disagreeable. Is he, Mr. Seymour? The air and manner in which he put this question quite destroyed the small remains of gravity Henry Seymour had, till now, with so much difficulty preserved, and bursting into a violent fit of laughter, he rushed out of the room. Everybody looked astonished, and Dr. Coleman embarrassed. After a short pause, however, he seemed to recover himself. It is very strange the Duke does not come, said he, pulling out his watch. The council must be chosen before this time, and they seldom stay to deliberate long after the first sitting. I'm miserable, cried Elvira. If he should be ill. That was loud. It didn't sound right either. I am miserable, cried Elvira. If he should be ill. Shall I seek him? Asked Dr. Coleman, and reading her assent in her countenance, he quitted the room. The doctor is very obliging, said Sir Ambrose, but he never did like Rosabella. He hated her father, and when Duke Edgar, but I forget, this history is a secret which must rest forever in my own breast. Do tell me, Uncle, cried Clara coaxingly. I should like to hear it, and everybody says you know all about him. And what does history have to do with such a little chit as you? I don't know, said Clara with the utmost innocence, but I'm sure I would like to hear it. Why? Again asked Sir Ambrose. Because everybody says it's a secret, replied Clara, clinging round him and fondly stroking his face. Do tell me, my dear uncle, pray do. You are a little coaxing wench, said Sir Ambrose, patting her long silky hair. I would tell you anything in reason, but the history of the father of Rosabella... Rosabella! Cried the Duke, bursting into the apartment with the fury of a maniac. Rosabella! Who speaks of Rosabella? She is a wretch, a vile and insidious wretch. She has destroyed me, and she has conspired to destroy my child. As he spake, the agonized old man sank into the chair, fainting with exhaustion, whilst a sanguine stream gushed from his mouth and nostrils, a blood vessel having been ruptured by the violence of his emotions. Elvira shrieked in anguish, and, dreadfully terrified, threw herself upon her knees beside him, imploring him to speak to her, while Sir Ambrose, even more alarmed than himself, ran screaming for assistance. Dr. Coleman and Henry Seymour were at hand. The Duke and his daughter, who had fainted, were conveyed to the separate apartments, attended by Clara, Sir Ambrose, and the doctor, whilst Henry Seymour and Father Murphy were left together. Oh, beauty, thought Henry Seymour as he watched the lovely form of Elvira, looking like some fair flower drooping on its stem, carried past him. How omnipotent is thy power! Even the savage monarch of the forest, tamed by thee, has crouched beside the fair maiden's feet. How heavenly does she look, pure as the immortal spirit, ere when his heart beast was sullied by the crusty of passions, man first conversed with God. I'm sure it's the princess you're thinking of, said Father Murphy, tired of being silent for so long. You have reason to look so sadly after her, for it's all over, and she'll never be queen. Henry Seymour started. The voice of the Holy Father sounded harsh and discordant in his ears. It had dispelled his fairy dreams, and with a movement of impatience he threw open some folding doors and walked into the garden. Father Murphy followed him. And where is it you're going? Asked he. Hold me alone, said Henry in a commanding tone. And you shall be, returned Father Murphy, when I'm after having you, and after that I'll do a whiffy, but begone! Cried a particularly low, hollow voice close to the friar's ear. Hold on. What was it? Oh. Yeah. Begone! Cried a particularly low, hollow voice which sounded close to the friar's ear. He started, and as he looked up, the withering glance of Cheops fell full upon him. He screamed wildly and fled, uttering shrieks of terror. Cheops looked after him with a scornful smile, and then, fixing his superhuman eyes on Henry Seymour, he waited for him to speak. Few were the human beings who could have met the scowl unmoved. Those wild eyes, shaded as they were by the thick, dark brows above them, always seemed to sink direct into the beholder's soul. Henry Seymour, however, shrank not from his gaze. A long pause ensued. You wish for help, said Cheops, and it is in my power to assist you. I know you will. You are not what you seem, but fear not, and all your hopes shall be fulfilled. Alas, how can they, said the youth, when I know them not myself? Hear me, returned Cheops. You love Elvira, you would fain become her husband, and yet would deprive her of her crown. Even now you are evolving in your mind a scheme to reconcile these two apparently incompatible objects. But besides innumerable minor obstacles, one great one destroys your plans. You have a father. In the name of heaven, cried Henry Seymour wildly, who and what are you? But ere he had finished speaking, the mummy was gone. Fiend, demon, cried the youth, what means this unreal mockery? But thou shalt not escape me thus. In the meantime, the Duke had somewhat recovered, and by permission of Dr. Coleman, Lord Edmund and Sir Ambrose were admitted to his chamber. The Reverend Father Morris and Murphy were there already. "I believe it is quite against the rules," said the doctor, "to allow visitors to a patient in the Duke's state, but he is so irritable I fear keeping him in suspense might occasion a relapse." "I'm sorry to see you thus, my dearest friend," said Edmund, pressing the Duke's hand warmly. "You have always been a second father to me, and God knows I love you as myself." The Duke fervently returned the pressure, but he could not speak. "My dear, dear friend," said Sir Ambrose, his tears trembling in his eyes. "Come, come," said Dr. Coleman good-naturedly. "I must not let you agitate my patient. Lord Edmund is only come. My Lord Duke's take leave. He is going to the country to try to exert his influence amongst the electors." The Duke shook his head. "I must not have you despair," said Sir Ambrose. "We shall beat them yet, but not that we must fight hard, for Rosabella is as crafty as a fox. You see what a party she's made. Besides, she's as selfish as her father." "No," said the Duke feebly, speaking with great difficulty. "Edgar was not selfish." "The influence of natural affection is astonishing," said Sir Ambrose, "since it makes you speak thus of one who has so grossly injured you." "Edgar's faults," replied the Duke, scarcely able to articulate, "were rather those of circumstance and feeling. I am convinced of it, and I forgive him. Nay, if he were alive and I could see him, I would clasp him to my heart." "Ah," said Father Murphy, "and that's just what's like yourself, for there's nothing like a Christian spirit for forgiving our enemies, and so may be heaven prosper and bless all that ye love, and send all ye hate to the devil." "But how does that accord with the Christian spirit you were talking of?" asked Dr. Coleman, smiling. "Ah," replied Father Murphy, "it's a clean other thing, for none but the devil's own brats could hate the Duke, and he's a right of his own surly." Dr. Coleman, though not quite convinced of the sophistry of the Holy Father, did not attempt to convert it, and the party, fearing the fatigue of the Duke, soon after separated. A few hours after this conversation, Father Morris was walking in one of the shadiest parts of the garden of Mr. Montague, where the thick trees spread over his head, and by their amabrigous foliage almost shut out the light from the sun. In the very center of this gloomy grove, a funeral urn had been erected by one of the former possessors of the mansion, over which hung a weeping willow. The monument had once been gaudily adorned with bright colors and gilding, to mark the immemorial bearings and dignity of the dust that mouldered below. Now, however, damp and neglect had hastened the work of time in such a secluded spot. The once white marble was stained with dirty green, and moss had grown around the crumbling monument of former greatness. The plaster effigies of the arms had cracked and peeled off in places, whilst wildflowers had taken root in the fissures and reared their blooming heads, and twined their fantastic wreaths around the smouldering stone, hanging a wild luxuriant festoons over this emblem of decay, as though to mock the feeble efforts of man to perpetuate his name, and assert triumphantly the supremacy of nature. Father Morris was struck by the effect produced by this apparently simple circumstance, and he stood with his arms folded on his breast, attentively gazing upon the urn. "And for this," he thought, "yes, even for perishable baubles as these, man does not risk his immortal soul. For this, for honors that decay even whilst we gaze upon them, for fame, for the slightest breath may blow right away, light as the thistle's down, for wealth and power, which, past a certain point, pall in the senses, and for ambition we sacrifice all the minds hold dear it. And what is ambition? What real happiness can fame, wealth, or power even bestow? I will repent. It is not yet too late. For words I would not harm for the old poor man. Yet he still has a heart, and I am not wholly lost. Oh, how his look, his voice thrilled my innermost soul and awakened my feelings I thought forever dead. Oh, Julia, Julia, surely thy blessed spirit would rejoice if angels can still feel for mortals at their repentance. Oh, if one fatal act could be recalled, and one fiend be satisfied, I might still be saved." Overpowered by his emotions, even his firm heart was softened. He leant his head against the moldering urn, and hiding his face in his cowl, he wept. Blessed were those bitter tears, and sweet were the sensations that stole over the mind of the monk as they flowed, for they were the first fruits of human feeling that had long touched that savage breast. Soothed by their healing balm, and half forgetting the cares that hung about him, Father Moore still reclined against the tomb, whilst mild and pleasing images floated before his fancy, and the fairy form of happiness rose again upon his sight, though, dim as indistinct as distance, seemed once more to beckon him forward through the mist of time. Lost in his meditations, the most delightful he had had and long indulged, the father remained unheeded of the lapse of time, till he was startled by a tap on his shoulder, and turning, he beheld the giant form of Cheops. "Fiend! Demon! Devil!" he cried passionately. "Avaunt, and tempt not!" The mummy burst into one of his fearful laughs of derision. "What?" he said. "Have you forgot your friend, your confidant, your confederate? And is this thus you treat him? Have you forgot our compact and your oath, which, if it was necessary, was to be sealed with blood?" The friar shuddered, and Cheops continued. "Pshaw, pshaw! Talk not of temptation. The passions of the breast defy its power, for demons scarce could credit them. Fear not temptation, then, most pure and most immaculate priest, for know I can read thy heart, and yes, even I shudder at the wickedness it conceals." "My feelings have changed. I repent." "Impossible. Your repentance is but a passing shade before the glowing fire, which, even if not removed, would soon be devoured by the flames." "I tell you, my purpose has changed. I will no longer plot against the Duke and Elvira, if she will, may be queen." "And do you think a crown is so enviable, then," said the mummy, repeating the friar's own words, once addressed to him, "that you think you would injure her by depriving her of its cares?" "Devil!" cried the father, unable to resist the feelings these words conjured up. "And there are these mortals," said Chops. "They sin and they repent, thus adding hypocrisy to guilt and doubling their crimes by the knowledge they have their own enormity." "Demon!" cried Father Morris, "the words of that old man wrung my heart, and I will sacrifice all the world can give to throw myself upon his breast and obtain his forgiveness." "I believe you think that now," said Chives maliciously. "But when Rosabella shall be queen, and the wealth and dignity shall be dispensed by Father Morris, when nobles shall bend humbly before him, and hanging upon his smile, beg favors from his hand, then—" "Curses on thee, fiend!" cried Father Morris, rushing from the grove, and pressing his cowl round his head with both hands, as though he feared the horrid laugh of Cheops should echo in his ears and sting him to madness. "Weak, feeble worm!" exclaimed Cheops, with a scornful laugh, looking after the friar as he darted from his sight. "And yet this man boasts of his intellect, aye, and rules his fellow men against his will. Degenerate wretches! O powerful Osiris, if from thy dead abode distinguished and look upon thy voluntary, pity him now, condemned to waste his days amongst this hatred race. And thou, fell Typhon, dread avenging deity, say, will thy awful wrath accept of victims such as these? Alas, I fear vengeance like thine will not be thus appeased, and that thy never-dying fire will still gnaw my vitals. Oh, these mortals think they suffer, but what are their torments when compared to mine?" As he spoke, he gnashed his teeth in fury, whilst against the expression of passions, too tremendous to be conceived by mortals, darkened his brow. "Okay. Ad break coming in. Ugh. The mummy's voice is really going to get to me." But yeah, be right back. Okay, ads are almost over. If my mod windows told me right. Okay, so the book is 32 chapters long. This next chapter is chapter 16. So after this, we will officially be halfway through the book. This chapter, chapter 16, is, I think, let me check again real quick. It's 13 pages, but I think it might be... It looks like it might be the second longest chapter in this book. Oop, nope. There's a 21... Ooh. A 21-page chapter is like chapter 30. Oh, the one before it's 25. Okay. This chapter shouldn't be nearly as bad as future ones then. But I will probably make this chapter the last one for tonight. So here we go. How many voices do I have to do this one? I kind of wish books would do a character list at the beginning of each chapter. That would make things so much easier for narrators. Maybe I should do that in my book. Just be a little bit more formatting, I guess. I'm going to get to write the characters at the end of the book right now. Anyway. Another drink. I feel bad for the people who are so stuck in Egypt, because it's been several chapters. No, it's only been a couple of days, though. They'll get back to England eventually. Okay. Chapter 16. I'm really... Of course it's speaking with... I'm really glad we left the house of my uncle, said Rosabella to Marianne, the morning after her removal to the palace of Lord Gustavus. Though there is something revolting to my feelings in being dependent upon a stranger, yet as it may soon be in my power to repay any obligations I receive from him, it is better than the treachery which I was obliged to practice towards the Duke. There is something so mean in treachery. We're always apt to feel most disgusted by those vices most repugnant to our nature, said Marian, smiling. Whilst we are merciful to those we practice, however, I can't say I think there is much difference. What? Cried Rosabella indignantly. Do you class those vices that spring from a noble though mistaken spirit with those that are the natural offspring of base, groveling minds? No, returned Marianne, for I think the latter preferable, as a mind that produces them is incapable of making nobler efforts, whilst the others, by degrading their possessors, show forcibility the monstrous depravity of the human heart. I do not understand you, said Rosabella. Nor is it necessary you should, returned her confidant. Rosabella was not quite satisfied with the summary manner of dismissing the argument, and was proceeding to question her confidant's maxim, when a tap at the door announced the page of Lord Gustavus, who came to know if the princess would honor his master with an attendance. Certainly, said Rosabella. In a few minutes Lord Gustavus entered her boudoir. I hope your Serene Highness has rested well, said the noble lord with his usual pomposity. I feel better this morning. I'm perfectly well, I thank your lordship, returned Rosabella, and the relief I have experienced by having the weight that has so long hung upon my mind relieved by the removal of your hospitable mansion has proved an excellent support. That being the case, said Lord Gustavus, Perhaps your highness will have no objection to indulge the noble lords who have already declared themselves on your behalf, as also some others of their friends who are anxious to enlist under your banners. With an interview thinking as I think, and as I am convinced every reasonable person in the kingdom must think, no time ought to be lost in a matter so much of such an infinite importance. Rosabella, thinking, par Marvel, exactly the same thing the noble lord, instantly gave him her hand to lead her to his library, where the illustrious personages had spoken of were waiting to receive her. It had already been said that Rosabella was beautiful, and now that her recent illness and the agitation natural of the novelty of her present situation had softened her usual pride and haughtiness of her demeanor, she looked perfectly lovely. It was often been allowed that a beautiful woman never looked so well as when in affliction, there being something in the appearance of a timid, helpless female looking up to man for protection and support that rouses every generous and manly bosom in her behalf. Whilst that wretch must indeed be lost to every sense of feeling humanity, who could be deaf to the prayer of beauty in distress? Thus the appearance of Rosabella caused a great sensation in her behalf, whilst her usual pride and haughtiness, which were well known, only made her presence diffidence and agitation. Her downcast eyes and trembling voice appear more interesting from the strong effect of contrast they produced. The persons collected in the library of Lord Gustavus were all affected by her manners, and though perhaps it would have been difficult to find a group of individuals more various in their usual habits and modes of thinking, yet upon this one point they were agreed. The personages who composed the most worthy assemblage were Lord Maysworth, Lords Noodle and Doodle, and Dr. Hardman, and the young Prince Ferdinand of Germany, who had been taken prisoner by Lord Edmund, and was now upon his parole of honor till the conditions of his ransom could be arranged. He was at present a guest of Lord Maysworth, who, having in his youth received great obligations from the German Emperor, was now glad of an opportunity to show his gratitude to his son, and who had now brought him to Lord Gustavus to introduce him to Princess Rosabella. Prince Ferdinand was ardent and romantic, and he was just that, the happy age when all appears bright and blooming, before reality has destroyed the fluttering dreams of hope, when we are all ready to believe we wish, and imagine human nature without a blot. Alas, why are the delightful moments of life so transient? And why must we never partake of pleasure without having to relish for it destroyed? Confiding, however, and the unsuspicious as Prince Ferdinand was, he was certainly excessively astonished to hear Lord Maysworth, the advocate of freedom and equality, eloquently plead in Rosabella's behalf that her father was the elder brother of the present Duke, and that consequently her claim was strengthened by all the magic powers of primogeniture, and he was still more surprised by his assertion that the present Duke had rendered himself unpopular by advising the late Queen to rebuild the late palace at Richmond, by which several hundreds of workmen were kept employed during the whole of the preceding winter, and saved from perishing. "Good heavens!" cried Prince Ferdinand, "can you blame that? Was it not better than the suffering of them to perish in the cold of the streets?" "No danger of that, your highness, no danger of that," returned Lord Maysworth. "Nobody can perish of cold in our streets, because, we always have pipes of hot air in them and make them quite warm. And as to the palace, it was really quite melancholy to think how many thousands of the public money were expended upon it. Oh, I assure you, it is quite impossible to find a man more deservedly unpopular than the Duke of Cornwall." "Oh, quite impossible," said Lords Noodle and Doodle, shaking their heads. "Thinking as I think, however, and as I am confident everyone here must think," said Lord Gustavus, "it would be impudence to depend entirely upon the Duke's unpopularity. Lord Edmund is beloved by the army, and he is decidedly upon the side of Elvira. We cannot take too many caution." "Oh, no, certainly. We cannot be too cautious," echoed the two repeaters. "In the glorious circumstance, however," said Dr. Hardman, "that the choice of the Queen rests entirely with the people. Their voice alone will decide this glorious struggle, and their free, unbiased opinions alone will give the monarchy to its future queen." Yes, said Lord Maysworth, it is true. It rests with them alone to decide the question, and for this reason do not you think it will be so best, my lords, for each of us to repair to his country seat and endeavor by his influence in the neighborhood to procure the election such deputies that may be disposed to vote favorably in our wishes. The plan is excellent, cried Director Hardman. Excellent, exclaimed Lord Gustavus. Thank you for the hydrate. Excellent, echoed his attendant satellites. Then it only remains for us to be put in execution, said Lord Maysworth. If the princess will excuse my absence, began Lord Gustavus. Oh, my lord, interrupted Rosabella hastily, for she dreaded his long speeches before the power of description. Think not of me. I must be, indeed, unreasonable, if I could complain of your absence when it is for my service you will be employed. The princess speaks like an oracle, said Dr. Hardman, and I think we cannot do better than put her wishes to execution. Farewell, my friends, said Rosabella, her voice trembling with the emotion as they parted. And may success attend you. For the present my poverty, and all but gratitude, prevents my wishes. But the time may come when you shall find the powerful queen will not forget the favors conferred upon the dependent princess. Oh, cried the noble lords of Dr. Hardman, do not mention reward. Patriotism and disinterested love of our country alone dictates our actions. We think of nothing else. It would be treason, and worse than blasphemy, said the Prince Ferdinand, to mingle the thought of self-interest with such purposes. Who indeed can see the Princess Rosabella, and suffer the paltry thought of self to interfere with the devotion to her interests? Rosabella smiled graciously upon the youthful speaker, though she did not speak. If, however, said Lord Maysworth, the interests of state should require a general more experience than Lord Edmund, I have served and would willingly forego the transports of domestic peace to promote myself to the welfare of my country. Oh, if the state should need a minister, observed Lord Gustavus, thinking as I think, and as I am sure everyone else must think, she has a right to command the services even of one so devoted to retirement as myself. For my part, said Dr. Hardman, I wish neither place nor pension, but if my humble services in a medical capacity— Fear not, returned Rosabella, but that all your wishes shall be gratified, for if I should be queen, I shall only regard myself as an agent to dispose my power to the hands of those most worthy of it. And she said this, she withdrew, having the rare happiness to leave all her auditors perfectly satisfied with her conduct. In fact, such was their delight, that each stood for some moments after her departure lost in contemplation, indulging in daydreams of the delightful anticipations her words and manner had excited, till, like Farmer Ashfield and his dame in Speed the Plough, they were in imminent danger of running foul of each other in their abstraction. The entrance of the servants, however, roused them from their reveries, and feeling somewhat alarmed of having so far forgotten the dignified sentiments they had been professing, they retired to their respective homes to take measures to put the scheme that had been suggested into execution. "How I hate that Lord Gustavus!" exclaimed Rosabella when she reached her boudoir. "Even if he makes a sensible observation, he adds so many explanations to it that the spirit evaporates." "Yes," returned Marianne, "he has yet to learn that to tack explanations to wit is like adding water to wine. You diminish its strength and spoil its flavor. But even he is preferable to Lord Maysworth." "Oh, I don't think so," cried Rosabella, "for a ridiculous fool is always better than a posing one. I can laugh at Lord Maysworth, but Lord Gustavus sends me to sleep." "When an important enterprise is undertaken," said Marianne, "it will not do to be very scrupulous about the tools one employs to accomplish it. It is the part of a man's talent to discover the weakness of the human beings around him, and make them each subservient to his purpose." "At any rate, that is not difficult in my case," rejoined Rosabella, For my good friends are so eager to show themselves off that I must do them the justice to say they neither give me the trouble to find out their weaknesses, nor the way to win them. Prince Ferdinand is the only one who possesses a single spark of noble feeling. And he, I think you say, seems struck with your appearance? He appeared so. We must improve that prepossession. An alliance with Germany may be invaluable to us. You must encourage the hopes of the prince, and do all you can to fan his interest into a flame. But I love Edmund. Pshaw! How can you be so childish? I do not think you love Prince Ferdinand. If you can contrive to make him love you, it will be all that is necessary. But you consider the cruelty of trifling with his feelings. Marianne laughed. I did not imagine you so romantic, said she tauntingly. Do not alarm yourself, for the rage of dying for love is gone by. Therefore, notwithstanding the power of your charms, you must excuse me if I presume to doubt their murderous properties. Rosabella was much too mortified by the manner in which her confidant treated her scruples to wish to continue the conversation, though the reasoning of Marianne produced its full effect upon her mind, and even, in spite of herself, influenced her conduct. In the meantime, the family of Mr. Montague experienced considerable uneasiness on account of Clara, whose health gradually declined. I cannot imagine what is the matter with my daughter, said Mrs. Montague one day to Dr. Coleman. I wish you could talk to her a little. Here, Clara, my dear, do just step this way. You will be quite shocked, Doctor, at the change of her appearance. Poor girl, I don't think she has ever properly overcome the fright she experienced at first sight of the mummy, for she has never seemed herself since, indeed. It seems to me she hoards some secret care that breaks her rest and drives her to despair. What do you quote that from, my dear? Asked Mr. Montague, more interested in his wife's quotation than the illness of his daughter. Oh, it is one of the lot I brought from the other day from the Patient's Theme-Book Manufactory in Hatton Garden. I've been buying other things, so I persuaded the man to throw me in a bargain of quotations, and very cheap. They were quite on you, and already cut, dried, and made into pills for use, but I never saw such a man in my life. You think nothing at all about your daughter. I really wish you would question her a little, for she will tell me nothing. Thank you for the stretch. Very well, my dear, I will, said Mr. Montague, but the next instant he was absorbed in his studies again, and had quite forgotten that beings such as Clara exist. Really, said Mrs. Montague to the doctor, I did not think my poor woman in the world was ever so plagued as I am. You see what my husband I have. He never troubles his head about anything, and if I were to take it into my head to walk off, I don't think he would even miss me. And then my daughter, but here she comes. Clara, I sent for you to speak to Dr. Coleman. Dr. Coleman was excessively struck by the alteration in Clara's appearance. The beautiful, lively, blooming girl was changed into a pale, shadow-like being whose existence seemed to hang upon a thread, and whose fragile form the first ungentle breeze could annihilate. What's the matter with you, my dear child? Asked the doctor. Nothing, said Clara, sighing. And I don't know anything that could be worse, said Father Murphy, who happened to be present. For that's a speech a young lady always says when she's in love, and I don't know any disease that's harder to cure. In love? Cried Mr. Montague, roused from his lethargy by that ill-omened word, which generally grates so harshly upon the ears of parents and guardians. In love? Repeated he, looking earnestly at his daughter. Who can she possibly be in love with? That's the question. No, hold on. Aye, that's the question, said his wife, for I'm sure I never trust her from under my own eye, and I'll defy her to fall in love without my knowing it. No, she cannot be in love. And that's no reason at all, cried Father Murphy, for I never knew a watching doing any good at such matters. Well, Clara, said Dr. Coleman, you hear Father Murphy's opinion. Do you plead guilty to the charge? Clara's blush became deeper, and her agitation so excessive, as Dr. Coleman fixed his eyes upon her, that finding she could not bear his looks, she burst into tears and hurried out of the room. Oh, poor Clara! The fangs of the most cruel of passions had indeed pierced thy heart, though thou wast unconscious of it thyself. It may be remembered that, on the day of Edmund's triumph, Clara had been forcibly struck by the fine figure and noble appearance of a youth who had walked as prisoner to the procession. It was Prince Ferdinand, whom, having formed a strong intimacy with Lord Edmund, had been almost constant visitor at the house of Mrs. Montague ever since. Clara was just at the age when the human mind first begins to feel the want of something to love. In her own family, her affections had been thrown back upon herself, and driven to the regions of fancy to find an object to occupy her heart. She would often wander for hours together in the garden, picturing herself adventures, which she would paint in the vivid colors of imagination, till, lost in creations of her own, she would almost forget the time and the tame, cold realities of life. Of course, all these imaginary adventures could not exist without a hero, but Clara could never fix upon a definite form to bestow upon him, till she had met Prince Ferdinand. Then all her dreams seemed realized, and the secret god of her idolatry appeared to stand before her, the proia persona. Clara was now perfectly happy, and as, from the prince's frequent visits to her cousin, she now often passed whole days in his society, though he perhaps scarcely saw her, or at most regarded her as a pretty child. Yet she was satisfied. She saw him, and she heard him speak. What more was wanting to complete her dream of bliss? Lord Edmund's departure from the country, however, broke this magic charm. Prince Ferdinand came no more to Mrs. Montague's, and Clara only heard of him as a devoted admirer of Rosabella. Jealousy till that moment had been scarcely known to her, even by name, but it now shot its fiercest pangs into her heart. Propria persona. What was it? First famous word. She had never accustomed to conceal her feelings, and now they destroyed her. The climax, however, was still to come. One day, as she was mournfully pacing the terrace in her father's garden, she was startled by the appearance of Prince Ferdinand himself. Her agitation was excessive, her lips trembled, and she panted for breath, and he passed on without noticing her. Yes, it was he, the cherished idol of her thoughts, the hero of her dreams, and he had passed without seeing, or at least without seeming to behold her. Was it possible he could have seen her and passed so coldly? Was it possible she could be so totally indifferent to one who was all the world to her? Oh, there was madness in her thoughts. She could not bear her own reflections. What would become of her? She knew not. She cared not, and in an agony of despair, she plunged into the thickest grove in the garden. Though it was summer, the day was cold and chilly. A drizzling mist fell fast, and a thick fog from the river wrapped the grove in gloom. Heedless, however, of the weather, Clara hastened to the spot where stood the marble urn. But as she approached it, she stared back for close beside the hideous figure of Cheops, dimly seen through the gathering gloom. "Fear not," he said in a softened, though still hollow voice. "Tell me your woes, and if I can, I will assist you." "Alas, it is in vain," cried Clara, in an agony of despair too profound even to admit her feelings and fear generally experienced by all those who saw the mummy. "No one can relieve me. I have no hope." Cheops smiled. "Poor child," he said. "It is always thus when years first creeps into the soul, covering his arrows with roses so that they are not seen till their barbed points rankle the heart. I cannot tell how much I pity thee, so young and lovely too. It is hard that even thou shouldst be exempt from the common lot of mortals. Yet do not despair." "I do despair," cried Clara, darting away from him. "I am truly wretched." From this moment, Clara saw that the mummy, almost daily, and her mind acquired a new force and energy from his society, though her health visibly declined. It was not indeed possible for human beings to hold daily intercourse with Cheops without feeling their souls withered. The glowing tints of youth and health rapidly faded from the cheeks of Clara. She became pale and spiritless, while she appeared to have lost all interest in the common affairs of life. Her fits of abstraction, however, her dejection, and her solitary wanderings at length became so evident as to excite the attention of her mother, and the scene we have just described was the result. Nothing could be more painful to poor Clara than the questioning she had undergone. She rushed from the presence of her parents to her favorite garden to think over what had passed, and to implore the assistance of the mysterious being with whom she had associated herself with. He was not there, however, and though she repeatedly called upon his name, he came not. The weather was now delicious, the autumnal tints that had just begun to change the lovely verdure of summer into the glowing brown gave richness to the landscape. Since the abolition of coal and wood fires, the air of London had become pure and bright, though it still remained soft from its vicinity to the river, and it was thus highly favorable to vegetation. Whilst, as no house was permitted to approach within a certain distance of the Thames, the sumptuous gardens that bordered its banks were beautiful to an extreme. That of Mr. Montague, which has been so awfully alluded to, was in particular laid out in greatest taste, and its grateful shade and delicious fragrance calmed poor Clara's troubled spirits, and soothed them to repose. Nothing, indeed, could have been more lulling effect than the harassed senses in the scene before her. The air was perfectly still, not a leaf was agitated, not a flower stirred. All nature seemed to repose, but Clara alone felt restless. The questions of Dr. Coleman, the surmises of her father Murphy, and the created variety of new feelings in her mind, she wandered up and down, oppressed by the sensation of melancholy which she had never felt before. She could not define her own sensations, she could not analyze her thoughts, and as she sauntered to and fro without a determinate object, she listlessly pulled the leaves from the rose that she carried in her hands. The scattering of rose leaves, however, recalled her to herself, and she smiled when she saw the mischief she had done. "Alas, poor rose," she said, apostrophizing to the flower, "I know not why I have destroyed thee." Then, walking hastily away, she plunged into the thickest part of the grove. "Why am I thus agitated?" she said to herself. "Why do I feel thus miserable and discontented? Can it be love? Love?" she repeated, whilst deep blushes glowed upon her cheeks, and she started to echo her own voice. She threw herself upon the turfy bank under a shady tree, and, resting her head upon her hand, watched through the leaves the light fleecy clouds that drifted along the sky. Still oppressed by the painful nature of her own sensations, she sighed heavily, and tears swam in her eyes. At this moment, footsteps rapidly approached, and Clara, springing upon her feet, hastily drew her hand across her eyes and hid herself amongst the trees. Dr. Hardman and Father Morris, who approached, seemed absorbed in conversation, and Clara, who dreaded Father Morris excessively, kept herself concealed to avoid meeting them. We have already mentioned that she is simple and innocent to a degree, but hers was the simplicity of ignorance, not folly. Her natural abilities were excellent, and her mind uncommonly strong. She therefore neither screamed nor fainted, though from her present position she became auditor to a scene of the deepest villainy. Notwithstanding the influence which Rosabella's party had at present to the state, Father Morris was not satisfied. He wished to make her election certain, and this could only be done by removing Elvira. Dr. Hardman was her physician. The rest may be easily imagined. Clara trembled, and her flesh seemed to creep upon her bones as she listened to this horrid conference, but her terror was even increased when they changed the subject, and spoke no longer of an intended murder, but of one that had already been committed. Clara shook in every limb, and her lips and cheeks became blanched with fear, yet she uttered no cry, nor betrayed her presence by the slightest motion. As they went, Clara stood like one awakened from a fearful dream, almost doubting the reality of what she had heard. An hour elapsed, yet Clara still stood motionless. What should she do? Would she What her unassisted testimony be believed in matters of such awful importance against the weight and influence of two persons of so much consequence in the state? No, she felt it would not. Yet if she remained silent, she would be accessory to the murder of Elvira. What could she do? What course ought she pursue? She knew not. A chaos of thoughts seemed whirling through her brain and threatened almost to drive her to madness. The longer she thought, the more she became confused, and she began to fear her senses were actually leaving her when a solemn voice sounded in her ear. Well, she did not know those deep and awful tones. They were those of Cheops, and confiding the awful secret to him, she promised to comply implicitly with his injunctions. It was the day following this adventure that Father Murphy and Abelard were conversing tranquilly together, lamenting over the degeneracy of the age, and their conference was interrupted by the sudden appearance of the Duke. "Where is Sir Ambrose?" cried he in a state of violent agitation. "Where is Sir Ambrose? I must see Sir Ambrose immediately." "Calm yourself, for heaven's sake," said Father Morris, who had followed him unobserved. "This violent agitation will destroy you. Remember your recent illness, your age, your weakness." "Where is Sir Ambrose?" "This vehemence is unbefitting of your station," continued Father Morris. "Moderate it, I entreat you. It will do you no good." "Will no one call Sir Ambrose?" rated the Duke. As the baronet, who had been summoned by Abelard, appeared, he threw himself into his arms, sobbing like a child. "Oh, my dear, dear friend!" exclaimed he. "They are determined to ruin Elvira. Lord Gustavus and his adherents have gone from their country seats to try to influence the election of their deputies, and my child can have no chance against such treachery." "If that be all," said Henry Seymour, who accompanied the baronet, "why not follow their example? Your influence must at least be equal to theirs." "He is right," rejoined Lord Ambrose. "I do not know why we did not do so sooner, but even now it is not too late." "And what end can possibly be produced by such a measure?" asked Father Morris, scowling darkly at the youth. "The freedom of the election should be inviolable." "But," hastily interrupted the Duke, "if they can attempt to control it, we may surely—" "I was not before aware," said Father Morris in his cold, ironical manner, "that the circumstance of doing evil was any reason for committing our sin." "Nonsense!" cried the Duke. "There can be no sin in securing the election for my daughter, and so, Sir Ambrose, we will set off tonight, if you please." "With all my heart," said Sir Ambrose, and the two old men and Henry Seymour hurried away, leaving the monk alone. He did not, however, remain so long, for in a few seconds Cheops was at his side. "So, sir," said Father Morris, scowling upon Cheops with a look of deadly hatred, "you have proved yourself my friend in suffering this babbling boy to counteract my views. Did you not boast he was your slave?" The mummy met his glance without shrinking, and bursting into one of his fearful laughs, exclaimed tauntingly, "And so he is, but I thought you had determined not to oppose the Duke any longer. It seems then I did not understand your reasoning in the garden." "Fiend! Cursed mocking fiend!" cried the friar, gnashing his teeth. "Nay," returned Cheops, "why blame me? Was I wrong in believing what you said? Was it then only a part you were acting to deceive me?" "Demon, thou canst reach my heart, but hast thou wished to drive me to distraction?" "No, no, good Father Morris, my worthy friend. I honor you too much. If I can read your heart, I must be charmed to see such devotion to your friends, such candor, openness, and integrity." "Taunting devil, be my sins what they may, thy presence is a penance that might redeem them. By heaven, hell itself was easier to endure than those bitter scoffs." "And darest thou talk of heaven?" said the mummy in his awful voice, that shrilled through the father's soul, whilst his eyes glared in such supernatural luster that the priest could not bear their beams, and sank upon one knee before him, bending his head to the ground. "'Tis as it should be," continued Cheops, with one of his fiendish laughs. "Yes, he is mine. He bends before my will. Now we'll tell thee why thy feeble reason was too powerless to discover. I am still thy friend. The Duke and Sir Ambrose will only injure their cause by their ill-judged measures they will make to promote it. They had the advantage of justice, honor, and upon open dealing on their side. Was it nothing to deprive them of these fair-sounding words? Will they in future be able to complain of corruption when they have attempted to corrupt? Had it not been so even to success crowned their efforts, would not the minds of men be inclined to side with injured integrity? For so they might be termed as the party of the Duke. Might they not also have said the election was secured by bribery and deceit? And upon the first discontent rose against Rosabella's government, would they not have recurred fondly to the recollection of the honest, open-dealing, plain-speaking Duke? Men naturally love and respect virtue, though they may be seduced for a time by the allurements of vice. Thus, though they might not have had the strength of mind to resist the arts of your party, their best feelings would have been remaining upon the side of Elvira. This can now no longer be the case. The Duke and Sir Ambrose voluntarily throw away their strongest hold. They rush blindfold to destruction. They degrade themselves to your level, whilst as they use deceit, they will not succeed in their endeavors, and disgrace will be only their reward. Now, do you blame me?
Blame you? Squirmed Father Morse. You are my friend, my best, my only friend, my preserver.
With regard to Edmund, said Cheops, we must excite his jealousy. If he were detached from Elvira, her cause would perish.
It would, cried Father Morse.
Then try thy efforts, said Cheops, and if thou canst excite suspicions, fan them gently into a flame, yet without seeming to do so. Do not attack Elvira openly or assert broadly that she loves another, but hint it darkly, so that your victim cannot understand, and that the damning certainty may flash upon his mind with a greater force than mere words can give. Thou knowest thou what I mean, and well hath nature modelled thee for such a part. That downcast look, that insinuating voice, that half-ironical manner, the infernal deity himself could not have wished for so fitting an agent to execute his designs on the feeling of thou than thou. Work upon Edmund, and success cannot fail to follow your attempts.
Now, Machiavel, cried Father Morse, my friend, my dearest friend, my benefactor. Oh, how I could fall down and worship thee! A sardonic smile curled the haughty lips of Cheops.
Learn then to obey in silence, said he, nor dare again to blame designs far beyond your comprehension. Ow!
Okay, yeah. Definitely think I'm done for the night.
Ow.
Oh. I guess I should find out if anyone's online to raid. So Corey. Maybe she's on. I don't know, can't tell. Oh. Let's see. I haven't raided Baffy for a long time. This is writing. Oh. Hannah's doing another rerun. Oh, God. griffins on. There we go. So, we're going to go from Cheops the Mummy to Dracula. So, copy one of the right messages. And hopefully I'll have my voice back at least tomorrow for some fairy tales. Otherwise, I will be reading them as creepy as fuck. Anyway, if you're on your way to work or at work, I hope you have a good night. But otherwise, we're going to raid Hart Griffin. So, hopefully see you tomorrow.
In the hollow of the night, shadows weave and twist. The wolf has told his stories, wrapped in mystic mist. Lurking in the silence where the echoes softly play, the echoes of forgotten tales dimming as they sway. The hours drip like candle wax, slowly melting gold. Lands of frost and twilight, secrets yet untold. The forest breathes a shiver, its ancient heart